Hello, and welcome to the Book of Heroes podcast. This is a weekly show dedicated to helping you get better at Storybook Brawl. I'm your host, Sidney, and unfortunately, I'm no longer joined by my co-host, Jesse. As we mentioned last week, Jesse is stepping down from the show. But, as you can tell by the presence of an actual episode this week, I am planning to continue the show on my own, at least for some time. So today, I'm going to talk about a little bit about that, about what the future of the show is going to look like. Then I'm going to talk about the new patch that was released last week, go through the changes to different cards and how that affected the metagame. And lastly, I want to pick a topic that was a little shorter that could fit in with those other things. And I've been thinking a lot about Peter Pants lately, about how to really finesse your build with this powerful hero. And I want to talk through some of the changes to the way I play Peter Pants since we last covered him on the show in episode 6. So, let's get right into it. First up, I do just want to talk about where the show's going from here. Obviously, a solo podcast is pretty different than a podcast with a co-host. And to be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue the show. On the one hand, I really enjoyed figuring out new strategic ideas and communicating those to the community, and I had a lot that I still wanted to talk about as far as the game. On the other hand, managing the show on my own is a big responsibility. I was doing most of the editing and promotional work before, but moving that to all, plus not really having a sounding board for my ideas, definitely made me think about it. And also, as I mentioned in the last show with the FTX acquisition, the community has changed a little bit. It definitely feels like we've seen some friendly voices step down, our friends on the 7th tier podcast. And where I came down is I'm still excited about the show, and I at least want to give this a shot. Right now, I am going to stick with a solo show with maybe some room for guests in the future. I would consider a new co-host, but to be honest, the list of requirements for that one is pretty long. It would need to be someone that I can have a good conversation with, that I can trust to be responsible, that is good at the game and good at communicating about the game, and practically speaking, just someone where the schedules match up, where it's easy for us to record together. And that was pretty easy with Jesse because we knew each other in person already. I guess I'm not actively looking for co-host applications, but maybe if I do take some guests, I'll see how things work out. And if I do find the right person, I might consider introducing a co-host once more. The other thing, I'm honestly not sure how engaging the show is going to be with just me talking. It's entirely possible that it's not. And while I'm certainly going to be paying attention to that myself, I want you all, the listeners, to let me know as well. If this isn't working, that's totally fine to let me know. And I definitely want to hear that feedback. The last thing is I am just going to try this out. There is definitely a possibility that after I record a few more episodes, I realize it just doesn't work on its own. And in that vein, this is sort of a trial run. I may record a few more episodes and realize this doesn't really work on my own and end things at that point. But that said, we're going to give it our best shot. So thanks for sticking with me. All right, let's talk about the patch. So last Tuesday, after about a month on the previous patch, we saw a new one, and this was definitely less substantial than the last patch we saw. I think one of the reasons for that is things did feel reasonably balanced with this last one. Treants were definitely the best archetype, and I think we saw them become even a little more dominant, especially in the spring championships, as a way to win and come first place in the late game. But there was a good deal of diversity, and the overall flow of the game felt pretty good. So this patch's changes seem to be geared toward just diversifying things a bit and making more archetypes viable. And so far, I felt pretty good about this one. There's a similar balance between archetypes, but treants are definitely less good, and I'm seeing more strategies come in first place. So specifically, we saw 2 changes to treants, and both of them came in the change to base stats of the key characters. So Ashwood Elm, formerly at 0.20, is now a 0.15, meaning that it by default gives plus 15 to attack to all your treants. And Burning Tree, formerly a 5.20, is now a 0.20. So both of those are obviously worse, and I think the main impact they have is to make Treants a strategy that's harder to speculate on and weaker as you're assembling it. Because once you've got an upgraded Ashwood Elm, maybe an upgraded Burning Tree and an Echo Wood to go with it, 5/5 in stats is not that big a difference. Often you're buffing both of those characters with Heartwood Elder bonuses, with health from the Green Knight, and their stats are just massively out of control. But when you're buying a 0/15 compared to a 0/20, and that's just its base stats at level 6, that's a pretty significant difference, and Burning Tree, I would say, is an even bigger difference. A 5/20 was already pretty decent, and combining it with something like Sporko, a 10/25, easily trades with multiple of your opponent's characters at level 5, meaning that that was a character that was really easy to speculate on right as you hit level 5. It was very rarely incorrect to just take Burning Trees as you saw them. In this patch, my impression is that that's not correct. You really do need a good deal of support. You want to be able to get its health to at least 10 or so, unless maybe you've got Heartwood Elders going. But you need to know if you're doing that route that you're going to take a bit of a power hit. You might lose a couple games because just a 5/25 or something is really going to die to your opponent's front line of 15/15s. And not necessarily trade for anything. And given that you're putting Heartwood Elders in the backline, which are already pretty weak, it's kind of a dangerous place to be. So Treants is still something you can get into, and I think the right place to do that is actually at level 6 most of the time. Because if you're starting with Ashwood Elm, that's at least a 15/15. Maybe you can immediately buff it with some health pumping effect, and then you can start taking the Burning Trees. And once you've got an Ashwood Elm, they're pretty strong. You still can do the Heartwood Elder thing, or maybe Ring of Meteors plus Darkwood Creeper, but those strategies are harder to assemble, and I find myself going into them less. Treants is more the thing you do if you're rushing ahead, maybe you're Zelhua, and you're just able to pick up a lot of in-game pieces relatively quickly. And at that point, it still is one of the strongest comps in terms of just raw stats, although it's slower to put together now, and you might find yourself outscaled by mages that was able to assemble Hatball Fork, or Good Boy that actually found two or three Good Boys in the amount of time you got your Ashwood Elm, Burning Tree, Echo Wood trifecta. One last note, because Ashwood Elm starts with less toughness, with less health, Green Knight becomes more important, and whereas previously that was a character you'd often roll past even when you were in Treants, I'm now a little more inclined to take Green Knights to support my Ashwoods. This patch also saw some changes to archetypes that were struggling a little more. Animals definitely had trouble. It was sort of an archetype that was reliant on Bearstain and often didn't have enough power to beat back a wall of Treants, which is typically what your opponent's front line was. So we saw two changes. First of all, Sheep in Wolf's Clothing, the level 4 2/2 that summoned to 6/6, was removed from the game entirely. On the other hand, Baby Bear, which previously was a 1/1 that summoned a 2/2 that summoned a 4/4, now is a 2/2 that summons a 4/4 that summons a 6/6. So Baby Bear's stronger, but we've lost one of our level 4 animals. And that almost makes this archetype more awkward and less about summoning at the lower levels, because while there's still Black Cat and Princess Peep available to summon animals, you really need some attack bonuses to make those characters relevant, something like Sporko, and your backline was already crowded with Bearded Vulture and Hungry Hippocampuses. So this is another archetype that I'm not so interested in the mid-game in this patch, which I guess hasn't really changed, even though both of those characters changed. But I will say it has been pretty strong with Pied Piper, which is a character that's really more happy to pick up animals than average. You can speculate on those hippocampuses, and even though you may not be doing a ton of summoning until level 5, you can still grab those characters, build up their health, and then you have much easier access to find a Bearstain at level 6. And once you found a Bearstain or two, this archetype really does become competitive. If you get one, if you did an early Bearstain via True Love's Kiss or Masquerade Ball or something along those lines, I think this is absolutely something you can build into. It's just tough to be successful in the mid game, and building around the summoners kind of works at level 2 and level 3 with stuff like Mad Mim, but at level 4 is a bit of a struggle, and it's usually not my preferred direction. Next up is Dwarves, and as I've mentioned before, Dwarves has really struggled in this last patch with the removal of Bossy and moving Tweedledee from level 4 to level 5. This archetype also doesn't really have anything to do at level 4. Greedy is not strong. She doesn't really fit with any dwarf synergies, and Angry at level 5 is really inconsistent, so even though Tweedledee is still a strong character, Dwarves is almost never where I want to be, and I'm very loath to prioritize any type of dwarf synergies. So this patch, we saw Tweedledee move from an 8-2 at level 5 to a 10-3, meaning of course that it by default summons a Tweedledum that is 3-10, and we also saw the spell Hi-Ho, which gives you a random dwarf and then gives all your dwarves +1/+1, move from 4 cost to 3 cost, moving in line with Blessing of Athena, only affecting your dwarves but also giving you a random character. My impression has been that this is not enough. Dwarves do not have a mid-game plan, though even though strictly speaking you could build an okay board with Lordy at level 6, focusing on dwarves up until that point is just too dangerous. You're going to lose your lobbies because you do not have strength at level 4, and it takes time to build it up at level 5 since Tweedledee is really your only strong character. Now that said, Tweedledee is still pretty strong standalone. Jesse and I talked about in previous patches how he's a character that you can plug into your comp if you have effects that boosts either attack or health, support, treasures, because those affect both Tweedledee and then Tweedledum. You sort of get a double bonus from something like Sting giving Tweedledee +10 attack, and then the Tweedledum it summons gets +10 attack as well, but also gets +10 health or +20 health if it's upgraded. So a 10-3 is definitely better base stats, and this is a character I'm happy to buy if I just need to add something to my board, especially if I'm playing Sporko, Lady of the Lake, Haunted Helm, or Sting, which are all ways to give lopsided attack and health bonuses. Tweedledee also fits pretty well into a strategy that I have found relatively recently, just today as of recording the podcast. I found I was pretty successful with this, and it has to do with the last character that was changed in the patch, Feasting Dragon. So, as a 12-8 at level 5 that slayed to give characters in your shop +1/+1, Feasting Dragon was pretty close to unplayable in the previous patch. So, Feasting Dragon is now level 4, and it's a 5-8 instead of a 12-8. So, harder for it to get slays, but it's available much sooner in the game, and my experience is that really makes a huge difference. The problem with this character previously is by the time you're level 5, 1, the impact of +1 to your shop is smaller because the characters you're buying are naturally larger, and that bonus is a smaller proportion of their total attack and health. And 2, you're less likely to replace characters on your board, especially if you're building around Feasting Dragon. Picking up things like Baba Yaga and Friendly Spirit are not useful once you're swapping out your board for the boosted things in your shop. Now, if you get a Feasting Dragon on 4.0, 4.1, right as you hit level 4, I found that this can be really effective. It's like casting 4 or 5 gingerbread parties. Now, the key thing here is you do need a way to get it to slay. A 5-8 is not likely to slay on its own, but it's pretty easy to pair with the classics, Sporko, Sting, Ring of Rage, or pick up Grimsouls to go with it. And interestingly enough, this character does have a sort of scaling. Even though it doesn't buff itself, it buffs other Feasting Dragons in your shop. And if you're going all in on this strategy, you want to pick up 3 Feasting Dragons to triple them. And remember, when you triple characters, their stat bonuses add together. So you pick up your first Feasting Dragon, maybe it slays once or twice. Your second Feasting Dragon is now a 6-9 or a 7-10. You can make that swap. Now maybe it gets 1 or 2 more slays. By the time you pick up that third Feasting Dragon, it's got another few pluses of bonuses. So your combined Feasting Dragon isn't just a 10-16, it's a 15-22 or something, plus whatever support type bonuses you've been applying to it. So I've had a few games where I've had a Feasting Dragon get 7-8 slays in a game, and that's really huge. That's like getting half of an embiggening stone, but it can apply to characters beyond level 3. So where you go from there is you can take characters at level 4 and 5 mostly that really benefit from the extra stats. Friendly Spirit, Wretched Mummy, Tweedledee, Wombats in Disguise, all of the Last Breath characters that do something based on their stats are great candidates for this. You want to triple those characters, combining all their stat buffs, and tripling the character usually doubles the impact of the stat buffs as well. So, for example, if you've been stacking shot buffs on your Tweedledees, if you get 5 +1/+1 bonuses and then you start buying Tweedledees, you end up with a 35-21 upgraded Tweedledee that blast breaths into a 42-70 Tweedledum. You get a similar effect with Wombats in Disguise, which can summon a massive character, and often you get a ranged character or a character with Slay or some other useful ability. Burning Tree triples the impact of your buffs to its health. And even a character like Southern Siren, which is a 10/10, doesn't always get to Slay later. If you get a 35-35 upgraded Southern Siren, that remains relevant for a lot longer in the game, and you get much more likely to get that devastating upgraded Slay. So the last piece of this archetype is an old favorite, which is Copycat, which is great at taking advantage of those last breath effects. For often you can do something like put a Friendly Spirit and then a Tweedledee or Wombats in Disguise behind Copycat. The Friendly Spirit's last breath will trigger twice. Sometimes it'll hit the summoning character, which then summons something absolutely massive. And this can be relevant even very late into the game. So the point is, you can build a game plan around Feasting Dragon now because those shot buffs are so powerful. And even if you're not doing the last breath style strategy, you can still get a lot of mileage out of the ability with something like Doom Breath or even Ashwood Elm that really does not mind coming in with 5-5 or 10-10 worth of extra stats. So overall, I do think Feasting Dragon is still somewhat of a situational character. I haven't felt that it's the strongest character at level 4 necessarily, but if you have the situations to generate several slays, it can really generate an advantage over time. That's it for the character changes after the patch, but there was one hero change as well, which is to Pan's Shadow, which went from 40 to 45 HP. This is exactly what Jesse and I requested a few episodes ago, and it's definitely helped out Pan's Shadow, which is still a worse than average hero according to SBB Tracker, although the sample size is still relatively low, but it's no longer bottom 5. I think the main reason that it's not winning as much as a hero with a similar power like Zelhua is because of the awkwardness of that level 4 turn. You're still cutting yourself off from level 3 triples, from level 3 treasures, and you get some awkward buying decisions as you're not able to use all of your gold efficiently at level 4. But if you tried Pan's Shadow before, you maybe liked the idea, but it just wasn't working for you. It's got a little more power now, although it's definitely still a worse than average hero in this patch. Those were all the balance changes for the patch, but it was nice to see that there were a couple of usability improvements as well. The treasure replacement user interface is a little clearer. You can now see that there's a big red X on the treasure you're replacing, and they offered the ability to turn off key bindings for the roll and lock shop buttons. By the way, this is something that I'd recommend you check out. To be honest, I have not internalized these bindings yet, but it's definitely something I want to practice, as being able to press a key to roll the shop in particular seems like it would be pretty useful if you're going through a tough turn with Hat Ball or maybe with the Holy Grail. So just to chat about some of the metagame changes from the patch. Overall, it looks like the hero rankings are still fairly similar to what we saw previously. Loki's notably doing pretty well, but he was doing all right before the patch. And most of the other heroes are in similar placements as before. Apocalypse has dropped down a bit, and I suspect that's because it's one of his best strategies was Treants, and it's a little harder to assemble a good Treants board starting from 0. He's still above average, but just barely, and given his weakness in the early game, not a hero I would strongly consider for the tournament this month. With just a week's worth of data, it's hard to tell how many of these hero placement changes are due to just variation versus the heroes actually being stronger or weaker. But if you don't look at the hero placement numbers on sbbtracker.com, I would strongly recommend it. I think that's more valuable than an individual person's tier list because it represents data across the community, whereas often one person can have some pretty strong biases. One hero I think people really like is Horde Dragon, but he actually doesn't do that well in the rankings, and I think that's really useful to know if you're trying to win your games, knowing that maybe people are a little biased toward Horde Dragon because they remember the games where he was really strong, but maybe not the games where he didn't do as well. And what the data shows is that Horde Dragon does have a pretty decent proportion of lower finishes, and he's overall a little worse than average as a hero. In terms of compositions, I talked about I do think that now that Treants is a little less dominant, all the competing compositions are a little bit stronger. The one I've seen the most is Slay. And in my experience, it tends to look a little bit different than the Riverwish Mermaid-based Slay that we saw a couple patches back as a dominant archetype. What I've seen now is a little more focused around just Lancelot, Baba Yaga, and Grimsoul as the power trio, and then Jormungand to supercharge that composition once you get to level 6. Slay might be the best comp now. It's hard to say for sure, but it's also one that requires a good deal of setup, and it can be a little bit fragile. Good Boy and Mages, definitely both reasonable options. Now that Treants is a little less strong, you have a little more time to assemble your combos with Mages. Animals and Evil are definitely sort of second tier archetypes, but I've won with both of them. I think they're both decent. I talked about Monsters as not being as strong previously, but I do think that's a pretty good mid-game archetype that you can just put together with some Friendly Spirits, Monster Books, Neans, combined with an Oni King that you see early on. And while you're eventually looking to transition that into something else, it'll certainly tide you through level 5 pretty effectively. One last note, and honestly this isn't really a metagame note, it's just something cool I learned today that I wanted to share with you all. Trophy Hunter, still not an amazing hero. One really neat thing I have seen with Trophy Hunter is the combination with Riverwish Mermaid. So you wouldn't normally think of Riverwish Mermaid as a good character for Trophy Hunter, as you're not looking to give more character slay. That means your Grim Souls are less likely to trigger the last breath slay abilities that you want them to trigger. But if every character in your front row is either a Grim Soul or a character that you actually want to trigger the last breath on as a slay effect, so typically that's Monster Book, Friendly Spirit, Wretched Mummy, what you can do is you can position that character behind both a Baba Yaga and a Riverwish Mermaid. Grimsoul actually triggers all slay abilities on a character. So if you're playing Trophy Hunter, you have a Friendly Spirit with a Riverwish Mermaid behind it, your Grimsoul triggers that character's slay abilities. It triggers the Last Breath slay ability from Trophy Hunter to buff your other characters, but it also triggers the slay ability from Friendly Spirit. If you've played or played against Trophy Hunter, you know you're getting 20 triggers in a game sometimes, because often your Grimsoul slays, you have Baba Yagas piling up everywhere. Given your Friendly Spirit, plus 20 per game is massive, because the limiting factor on that character is its base stats. So I think you still want to prioritize Grimsoul and Baba Yaga for Trophy Hunter, but once you have those and a Last Breath to trigger, Wretched Mummy, Friendly Spirit, Monster Book, I think a Riverwish Mermaid is a reasonable addition to that comp, particularly if you have Horn of Olympus, which is the treasure that Trophy Hunter is interested in anyway. Trophy Hunter still substantially below average as a hero, but also a lot of fun to play, so worth a shot. Okay, so I think that's it for patch metagame stuff, but since this was a smaller patch, I wanted to cover another topic on this episode, and that topic came out of a discussion in the Storybook Brawl Discord, specifically on characters for Peter Pants to buy. So we covered Peter Pants in episode 6, starting at level 3, but it's been nearly 5 months since then, and I think I've updated the way I play this hero a little bit, and also I re-listened to that episode, and I think there are a few things that I said that I wish I'd said a little differently. So one thing that comes to mind is that a lot of heroes think about having a mid-game comp, something like animals or treants in the mid-game, And I used to think Peter Pan's was like that too. But my opinion now is that really his mid-game is just about assembling a strategy out of whatever level 3 characters that you can find and triple. Because the way that you win the end game is with Merlin's Hat, Crystal Ball, and frankly, usually Forking Rod. Just about every game that I've seen Peter Pan's come first place has been a game where Peter Pan's has had a Forking Rod. I could see it happening with Embiggening Stone, but that's a lot harder to find. And so my strategy has shifted a bit toward just surviving that mid-game and then really working toward that end game of Hat, Ball, Forking Rod, and then a bunch of upgraded level 3 characters that I can hit with Mix-a-Wizzle, True Love's Kiss, and occasionally Shard of the Ice Queen to lock in a Mix-a-Wizzle. Consequently, while Wizard's Familiar and Spellweaver are still good scaling characters, I actually think they're a little less important. Once you have Hat, Ball, Fork, you still want to pick them up, but you're often not playing multiple Wizard's Familiars especially. You're just playing the Doom Breaths and Good Boys and Ashwood Elms, and if you got lucky, Storm Kings that you found through your True Love's Kisses, especially if you're doubling those True Love's Kisses with Forking Rod. So I think a good useful way to think about that is a tier list. Historically, we haven't done a lot of tier lists, but I kind of liked the one I created for this episode, which I'll include in the show notes, because it's just showing character priorities during the early and mid game. So I want to go through that, starting with the S tier, or just most important characters, which are Brave Princess and Prize Pig. And these are characters that are best when you're buying them when the rest of the lobby is level 2, but they can still be strong a little later on. Brave Princess gives you a very fast treasure and a fairly quick upgraded level 3 character, which, as I've said, is important for being able to hit with True Love's Kiss. Because every time you take a level 3 treasure, it is removed from the pool of treasures. Every one that you find gets you closer to Merlin's Hat, Crystal Ball. So it doesn't actually matter what that first treasure you take is, as long as it's doing something for you. And then, of course, there are lots of treasures that help you in the mid-games: Sting, Haunted Helm, Ancient Sarcophagus, etc. Brave Princess gets worse once the rest of the lobby is past level 3, but oftentimes you'll find one before then, just because you get so many looks at your shop. Prize Pig, similarly, is just the best way to gain economy. Its raw stats mean that it can win a fight on its own at level 2 and survive the fight, and that's the point where the economy is most valuable. I think my most successful Peter Pan games are where I find a Prize Pig at 3.1, which is the rest of the lobby's 2.1 or 3.2. Because of the shop scaling that you have access to, the easy triples and treasures you have access to, you can often keep a Prize Pig alive, especially once it's upgraded until level 5, and getting 2 to 4 extra gold around is just incredible for your tempo. And by the way, it's okay if you don't get that every single round. If you get it half of the rounds and it dies and gives your opponents an extra gold the other half, it's still doing a perfectly fine job. Share has consistently been a strong hero, even though he gives your opponents 1 gold, and Prize Pig is similar. Moving on to the very strong category. When I posted this in the Discord for discussion, the character that generated the most discussion at the sort of A level is Blind Mouse. And Blind Mouse is a 2/2, so obviously it's not doing much of anything for your board, and I wouldn't pick it up before I had 7 or sometimes 6 characters with the White Stag that I was happy with, a board that I felt like could win a fight, unless I had just had a spare 2 gold. But I think it's important to start collecting blind mice early as Peter Pants. Main reason being Forking Rod, which is, as I said, almost mandatory if you actually plan to win the lobby, and even in a not so great position, it's still a pretty strong treasure. You won't always find a Forking Rod with your first set of mice, which makes it even more important to find more than 3 over the course of the game. But you're also pretty happy to pick up Moonsong Horn, which is sort of your budget Merlin's Hat. You'd like to replace it with a regular Merlin's Hat, but it'll do an okay job at making a Crystal Ball viable. And also at finding Gloves of Thieving, which is a little bit unreliable. You're casting effectively Kidnap every round, but Peter Pants can do a lot if you are able to scale a strong character from an opponent's board. So you can get a lot of mileage out of something like an upgraded Grimsoul, and it also becomes a good target for True Love's Kiss, maybe even if you don't have a discount, because getting one higher level character, especially if it's upgraded, can help you build a stronger comp. So you're happy to get mice for Forking Rod, Gloves of Thieving, Moonsong Horn, and there's other treasures that help you win fights, such as Ring of Rage or Six of Shields. But blind mice also really help when you are picking Treasure Map as one of your level 3 treasures. So the thing about Treasure Map as Peter Pants is normally you're getting a level 5 treasure off of it. And certainly there are level 5 treasures that help you win fights, the big ones being Dracula's Saber, Monkey's Paw, Sword of Fire and Ice. But those treasures do not win lobbies. And there's also a lot of misses at level 5. You can't do too much with Ambrosia, Evil Eye, Hand of Midas, and even Mimic, while it sort of acts as a very budget Forking Rod, is not the best treasure for Peter Pants. You'd rather have actual Forking Rod. Having 1 to 2 blind mice in your hand makes taking Treasure Map a much better pick, because once you open up level 6 treasures, you're able to find either Embiggening Stone or Wand of Weirding, which is effectively just another Forking Rod. Those are both amazing level 6 treasures and really will contribute to a winning composition with Peter Pants. You're also pretty happy to find Ivory Owl, Spear of Achilles, Singing Sword. These are similar to the level 5 treasures in that they just help you win fights. They don't really give you a board that can win the lobby, but they're a lot better at it. All of those treasures are significantly stronger than something like Monkey's Paw. So having mice in your hand makes taking Treasure Map a more appealing option, maybe if you're choosing between that and one of the worst level 3 treasures like Eye of Ares or Cloak of the Assassin. Anyway, point is, I think a lot of people don't take blind mice at this position based on the reaction I got on Discord, and I do think that it is correct to prioritize them quite highly. The other characters I prioritize here are a little less controversial and are for completely different reasons. Lucky is strong in the early turns as Peter Pants. It doesn't help you win fights like Prize Pig does, but it does almost guaranteed to generate an extra 2 gold per turn by making characters in your shop free or costing 1. And if you take this on 3.1, 3.2 on your second or third turn of the game, you are going to have a large economic advantage going forward. The White Stag is sort of the opposite. It just helps you win fights. It does not help with tempo, but it's one of the best characters to do that in the game. I often play 6 character boards because of the White Stag. It's easier to triple as Peter Pants. It's one of the characters I keep in my comp for quite some time, especially because Peter Pants shot bonuses help an upgraded White Stag survive a hit even when it's in slot 2 and you have a character in slot 1. There are a lot of things you can put behind it, and that brings me into the pretty strong category, Tier B, so not as good as what I've mentioned previously, but still characters that you want to prioritize. First 2 are the range scaling characters, Spellweaver and Shadow Assassin. Now, obviously Spellweaver is great in in-game Peter Pants, because you're casting 5, 10, 20 spells a turn. It's scaling super fast. I believe it is generally incorrect to be casting many or any spells until you have really Merlin's Hat to make them cheaper, because as Peter Pants, it's very important to be finding treasures. That is how you work toward your in-game composition. The way you lose games, the way you come in 4th or 5th as Peter Pants, is you never find Merlin's Hat and Crystal Ball. And that will happen if you are not spending your gold, rolling for triples, and buying triples of level 3 characters. That said, Spellweaver benefits a lot from your shot bonuses. Even buying it on everyone else's level 3 gives you a 2-4 ranged, and you can sneak in some free or 1-cost spells that will buff it up pretty quickly, or stick it behind a White Stag. Shadow Assassin is similar, but it starts as a 2-4, which is significantly better. So this is a character that I'm okay with buying when everyone else is level 2, because it often trades for 2 characters. And there are several Slay characters that you're pretty happy with playing as Peter Pants. So it's actually stronger in the early and mid game. It's just it falls off once you actually get your in-game hackball combo going. Either way, both of these ranged characters are strong and will help you win a lot of fights. Vampire is another character that I do like a little bit more as Peter Pants. It's not that strong. It's a 4/4 that scales +1/+1. Not that great, but if you can get it when everyone else is level 2, or get a triple with some shot buffs, it remains viable in your comp for longer, and Shadow Assassin means that you want to be buying scaling characters. You can also sometimes combo this with Bad Moon. So it's on the kind of lower end of B, but I'd still rank it above average for Peter Pants. Trojan Donkey is another character that's sort of but it is a little stronger than average. It will absolutely win you fights when everyone else is level 2, and because of your shot buffs being cumulative, by the time you've tripled a Trojan Donkey, it's often picked up some extra stats, and that makes it pretty viable even when other players are level 4 or so. It also pairs great with White Stag. It's probably my second favorite thing to put behind White Stag, other than a ranged character, although actually Brave Princess is my second favorite thing, so I'd say Trojan Donkey is third there. Last character in the pretty strong B tier category is Wretched Mummy. This is not something you buy at level 2, but once you've got a couple turns worth of shot buffs stacked up, Wretched Mummy makes really good use of these shot buffs. It's something you can keep in your composition once you've got hat balls. It's a great target for Wormroot, and it benefits from being upgraded. So I definitely start picking these up once I have 1 or 2 turns of shot buffs, or if I have a support, usually Wicked Witch of the West, that is going to make it deal a decent amount of damage immediately. And that brings us to our okay C tier, which contains a lot more characters. So this is actually our first appearance of several level 2 characters. And the reason for that is treasures. I've watched people stream playing Peter Pants buy level 2 characters for tempo just to win fights, and I think that's usually a mistake. Because every gold that you spend on a level 2 character is not gold that you're spending on a level 3 character and not working toward hat and ball. So if you have 2 gold left over and your board is weak, it can sometimes be worth it to buy a level 2 character that just fits in your comp. But most of them are characters that I'm avoiding, and I did want to highlight a few that Peter Pants is sort of interested in, although not as much as Blind Mouse. Cinderella is mostly a character you want to buy once you have Merlin's hat. As I mentioned, you don't want to be casting a lot of spells before that, but it's important to note that not only will buying her take her out of your shop, meaning that you're more likely to roll into other triples that you're looking for, but once you've cast 4 spells, she gives you a treasure. You usually don't want a level 2 treasure, but you're happy to take the 2 gold, and then you can resell the upgraded Cinderella for an additional gold. So she's mostly just an economic pick, unless, for example, you buy her as your very first character of the game when you only have 2 gold. Wizard's Familiar, I think, is a character that you do not want to buy early as Peter Pants, and I think that's a mistake I sometimes see people make. Wizard's Familiar starts as a 1/1. It is only really better than an average level 2 character once you've cast at least 2 spells. And given that Peter Pants has access to these shot buffs and strong characters, you really want to be casting lots more spells than that. And I think you're only doing that once you have Merlin's hat and really once you have Crystal Ball. Until then, if you buy a Wizard's Familiar, it's just sitting in your hand. It's taking up hand space, you're spending gold on it, and it's not really scaling. So I do not typically start buying Wizard's Familiars until I have both Merlin's hat and Crystal Ball, or maybe one of those plus Forking Rod. It's okay if you only have 1 upgraded Wizard's Familiar in the late game. 2 is nice because they benefit more from your hat ball scaling, but you can usually get a similar benefit from casting a bunch of True Love's Kisses. Just to briefly discuss the other level 2 characters here, Crafty is just pretty cheap in terms of stats. Once you have 3 treasures, it's an 8/8 for 2 gold, and tripling it gives you a 16/16. Not really what you want to do, but sometimes you're just losing and you need to buy something. Golden Chicken, while I'm a big fan of this character in general, is worse as Peter Pants because you really value your hand space. Oftentimes with Peter Pants, I'm holding multiple doubles in hand, and it's kind of a waste to buy characters that are then taking up hand space later on. Sometimes still the right play if you're left over with 2 gold, but you're selling your golden chickens with pants more than with other characters. Then also in this okay category, tier C, I've dumped a bunch of other level 3 characters. So just to talk through why all of these are sort of okay, but not really worth being excited about. Romeo, obviously you don't have access to Juliet, but it's just decent stats. Sleeping Princess actually is pretty good once you have one that's been hit with a spell and turned into a Woken Princess. But as I mentioned, you're not that excited about casting spells, so unless it's early game, you really kind of need the tempo and there's a spell in the same shop that will hit your Sleeping Princess, I would not be excited about buying these. Although I will say, sometimes you'll just pick up any double in the shop that you see of a level 3 character. So any of these can be the right pick, even if it doesn't fit into your board or you don't have the tools to make it take advantage of it. Wicked Witch of the West is fine. It definitely gives your Wretched Mummies and some ranged character stats, but the positioning is a little bit awkward because you want your ranged characters in the back line, and the characters you're most excited to support with it are Spellweaver and Shadow Assassin. Also works fine with Vampire and Wretched Mummy, but sometimes you just have the ranged characters. This isn't quite as good. Darkwood Creeper as a 0/3 is just too small. You're not interested in trying to find Ring of Meteors. That will not help you in the late game. You can still pick them up, especially if you can hit it with a Flourish or something, and it will grow your tough frontline characters a little bit. Queen of Hearts is okay if you have a predominantly evil board, but I would not try to bend over backwards to accommodate the Queen of Hearts. I would just take whatever level 3 triples you can find, even if they're good or neutral characters. Remember that your in-game is Merlin's Hat and Crystal Ball, and that means that you'll be casting a lot of Beauty's Influences, which will gradually turn your board good. That means the Queen of Hearts is probably getting True Love's Kiss at some point if you've managed to upgrade it. Ogre Princess is an economy character, and I do like that about her, but she's a pretty unreliable economy character. She needs to slay, and she starts off at just 3/1, which means even when the rest of the lobby is level 2, sometimes she will still miss a slay, making her a good deal worse than either Prize Pig or Lucky. She's still fine, you can still play her. The other thing is you don't benefit quite as much from the upgrades since she gives you a character of your level, but you have lots of level 3 characters anyway, whereas another hero might find level 4, 5, 6 characters. A situation where Ogre Princess is strong is if you can combo her with a Wormroot in the shop, which is a spell that's worth casting if you have monsters that can benefit from it, or if you can pick up an early Bad Moon and actually scale the Ogre Princess to something that can get slays later in the game. Although, as is true for most of these characters, it's getting True Love's Kiss eventually. Last one here is Good Witch of the North, similar to Wicked Witch of the West, a little bit stronger overall, but still a little awkward to position and something that's sort of a temporary strength measure. Definitely good to put behind some white stags though. Alright, so that's all of the sort of okay characters. Lastly, characters to avoid as Peter Pants. So every level 2 character that I haven't mentioned is something that you do not want to buy unless it just perfectly fits into your composition and you have extra gold and you're kind of weak. The only real exception being the first turn of the game where you only have 2 gold. Collecting level 2 characters takes up board space that you could be using for level 3 characters. Hand space, it makes you weaker on average since these characters are weaker in general, and most importantly, it keeps you from finding level 3 treasures, which is your whole game plan. A couple of characters that might seem appealing here but aren't really. Lonely Prince can be okay, just if you need to win some fights and you have 2 gold left over and you bought a princess that same round, but you don't want to try to collect 3 of them because it's taking up space on your board and you have easier ways of getting a 10-10. Happy Little Tree is not really where you want to be as Peter Pants. You don't have the late game treant support to make this good, and frankly it's just too finicky with Darkwood Creeper. You have easier ways to get strong for the mid game. Polywoggle seems like it would be good because it's a way to find higher level characters, but Polywoggle is limited to getting level 4 characters on Peter Pants. That's much easier to accomplish with True Love's Kiss and doesn't require you to make your board weaker. Easter Egg might seem appealing. As Peter Pants, you do have an easier time finding Humpty Dumptys a little later into the game, but As said, you want to have all your treasure slots filled by level 3 treasures. Easter egg is a lot of work. It takes up hand slots, storing your Humpty Dumpties. It's risky if you're actually playing those characters, and if you're not playing them, it makes them weaker, so you don't want to pick Humpty Dumpty either. That's it for level 2s. There's a couple level 3s that I would put in the avoid category. Doubly scales pretty slowly at this point in the game. When your opponents are at level 4, it's a 5-5. While it does benefit twice from the shop bonuses and triply benefits 3 times from the accumulated bonuses, it just doesn't go fast enough until the very end of the game, and at that point you usually are more interested in casting spells than in buying characters, especially characters that aren't scaling with your spells. When your opponents are at level 4, doubly in your shop is a 5-5, and it triples into a 20-20, which is pretty good, but you can't really play the 5-5s until then. And it's not getting bigger unless you have a stat boosting treasure or maybe a Darkwood Creeper. When your opponents are at level 6, it's a 9-9 when you buy it, and it triples into a 47-47, which is definitely good, and it can be worth buying at that late point in the game. But frankly, at that point in the game, if you are executing this strategy, you are usually going to have Merlin's Hat Crystal Ball, and that means you want to be casting spells, not speculating on doublies. Now, that said, you can still definitely buy them just if there's 2 in the shop as a way to find a level 3 treasure. That's something you want to consider with any level 3 character, but you're not super interested in buying doublies in order to play them unless it's later in the game. Princess White is actually probably the worst character, however. She's not very strong in general, and buying dwarves is not where you want to be. There's 2 level 3 dwarves, and while lucky is okay early in the game, you're not excited about giving it bonuses from Princess White when you buy it later. We just discussed doubly, and while, yes, Princess White does turn doubly maybe from a 5-5 into a 7-7, that's still not quite enough, and in order to actually get Princess White to trigger a quest, you have to buy 7 dwarves. Yeah. And that usually means you're buying level 2 dwarves. Fanny, Tiny. That's a lot of gold that you're spending on things that are not helping your board and are only giving you 1 level 3 treasure. I would almost always avoid Princess White. The last character to mention here for Peter Pants is Princess Peep, also with double P's. Princess Peep plays poorly on many boards because at best she's generating 2/2s, and while you can boost those with Good Witch of the North primarily, it's just not enough. Those 2/2s are often attacking when you actually want your ranged backline to be attacking in that position, and you don't have the level 4 characters, Bearded Vulture and Hungry Hippocampus, that benefit from summoning so many tokens. So usually I'm not interested in Princess Peep, although if there's 2 in a shop, I'll pick them up just for the treasure. All right, unless I missed any, that is all of the characters that you can buy as Peter Pants, and hopefully that gave you all a better sense of when those characters are appropriate and how to value them. We also talked about the patch today. It's pretty good. I've had a lot of fun playing it in the past week, finding new strategies like Feasting Dragon, Copycat, Last Breath, or just going into some of those compositions that Treants was sort of crowding out of the metagame. Even though it's just me now, I still definitely want to hear your feedback on the show. If there's strategies that you found different, if you would like to argue with me about my Peter Pan's tier list, I'm actually very interested in having a polite discussion about that. I love hearing contrasting ideas, and the best way to do that is in the Book of Heroes Discord. There is a link in the show notes. It's a community of folks that are looking to improve the game, and you can also post questions for me to answer on the show. It's just me now. Keep wanting to mention Jesse, and he's not around anymore. But anyway, you can also follow the Book of Heroes podcast on Twitter at Book of Heroes SBB, or email me. I want to say us. Fine, I'm just going to say us. The royal we. You can email us at bookofheroessbb@gmail.com. You can find our episodes online at bookofheroes.podbean.com and on major podcasting apps such as iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify, such as Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. And you can find me playing Storybook Brawl. My username is Koga305. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next week.